A small piece of clay, about the size of your open hand, pressed with wedge-shaped marks by someone whose name no one remembers. It sits in the British Museum right now, silent behind glass. And here is what it actually says, the oldest complete sentence human beings ever wrote down and kept. Not a love letter, not a prayer, not an epic. It is a receipt for beer. Think about that for just one moment. The very first thing our species decided it could not afford to forget was how many jars of beer were handed out to the workers that morning. Civilization did not begin with philosophy. It began with accounting. Welcome to Mystique History. What did a single day actually feel like in one of the first cities on Earth, 5,000 years ago, on a flat brown plain between two rivers? Let me take you there. The day begins, as every day begins in this corner of the world, with heat. Not the gentle warmth of a temperate morning, but the immediate pressing weight of the Mesopotamian sun lifting over the flat horizon and making its intentions known without any diplomatic preamble. The date palms that line the canals catch the first light, their feathered tops turning gold above the brown mud of the banks. This is southern Iraq, in what today is called the Dekar province, near where the Tigris and Euphrates once spread into the broad marshes of the ancient Persian Gulf coastline. The plain is so flat that a man standing on the city wall at dawn can see 20 miles in every direction. The horizon, a perfect line between earth and sky, unbroken. Along those canals, the quiet engineering miracle that makes everything else possible, the first workers of the day are already moving. This irrigation system is not a gift from nature. It is the accumulated labor of generations, a vast network of channels and dams and sluice gates that pulled the Euphrates into fields which otherwise would be nothing but dust. And someone has to maintain it, constantly, because the river does not care about the city's schedule. The city itself, let us call it in the year roughly 2500 before our era, during what historians call the early dynastic period, when Sumerian civilization had already been building for 1,000 years, wakes slowly, by degrees. The mud brick houses along the narrow lanes are beginning to open their doors. Wooden doors set into frames of mud brick walls thick enough to keep the summer heat outside, yet thin enough that you can hear the neighbors' conversation through them. The interior walls are smooth plastered, sometimes whitewashed. The rooms are modest but never squalid, furniture of wood and woven reed, clay vessels arranged on earthen shelves, a central courtyard open to the sky where the family's cooking happens around a clay oven. The flat roof is a second living space, where people sleep during the hottest weeks, where vegetables dry in the sun, where a woman in the early morning might sit quietly and watch, over the low parapet, the upper terraces of the Ziggurat catching first light while the rest of the city is still deep in shadow. And you know, whenever I picture that woman on that rooftop, I find it strange and wonderful that her sky was the same sky I saw this morning. The same sun, the same light slanting across mud brick. Only the city has changed. The Ziggurat is the first thing you see as you approach and the last thing you see when you leave it. It is a stepped pyramid built from mud brick, its terraces climbing in stages above the flat plain, its summit, where the temple proper stands, rising around 40 feet into the sky, visible from miles away. The bricks of its outer face are fired and set in bitumen, a thick black tar that seeps naturally from the earth here and acts as the Sumerians' waterproofing agent. The outer walls are carved with vertical recesses that catch the shadow at certain angles, creating a shifting pattern of light and dark across the day. This was not accidental. The Sumerians were not building a warehouse, they were building a house for a god, the moon god Nanna, and every calculation, Every angle, every brick was chosen with the care that the residents of such a being deserved. The priests and priestesses who serve him, who prepare his meals, dress his cult statue, perform his ceremonies at the proper hours, have been awake since long before dawn. A god's schedule is not negotiable. And here is something that may feel utterly strange to a modern mind. The Ziggurat is not only a temple, it is the city's economic engine. Its landlord, its employer, its bank, its granary, its factory, and its welfare system, all at once. The temple of Nanna owns fields beyond the walls. It owns flocks of sheep and herds of cattle. It operates enormous weaving workshops, producing linen and wool that both feed the city and travel down the river in exchange for copper, tin, timber, and that extraordinary deep blue stone called lapis lazuli. The food that keeps the city's non-farmers alive, the craftsmen, the scribes, the merchants, the musicians, the guardsmen, all of it flows through the temple's storerooms. And every single transaction, every allocation of grain, every field measurement, every jar of oil is recorded on clay. The scribes are already at work in the tablet house, the Edubba, meaning literally house of tablets. They have been training since childhood, selected often from families already connected to temple administration, sent to school where they spent years copying lists of words, lists of signs, multiplication tables, legal formulas, and letter templates, until the wedge-shaped impressions of the reed stylus became reflex, until cuneiform flowed from their hands as naturally as breath. The scribes are not the most glamorous members of Sumerian society, not the wealthiest, but they are the most quietly indispensable. Without them, the temple cannot function. Without them, the city cannot feed itself. A surviving Sumerian text known as The School Days, written centuries later, but describing a scene that had changed very little, tells us of a student who oversleeps, arrives at school late, is scolded by the headmaster's assistant, scolded again for talking without permission, scolded a third time for an untidy tablet. At the end of his miserable day, his father invites the teacher home for dinner and offers him gifts, because the education of a scribe is too important to be interrupted by one boy's bad behavior. Some things, apparently, do not change. The scribes record everything. The earliest cuneiform tablets we have are almost entirely administrative. Receipts for grain, records of beer rations, inventories of livestock, field measurements, lists of offerings made to the gods. The oldest beer allocation tablet in the world, now safely in London, dates from around 3100 before our era, and it shows the symbol for beer, an upright jar with a pointed base, beside numerical notations indicating how much was issued and to whom. Beer in Sumer is not a luxury. It is a ration, a form of currency, a measure of status. Ordinary workers receive a set amount each day. Senior workers receive more. It is brewed from barley, one of the two great crops of this plain, along with the date palm, and drunk through reed straws to filter out the grain sediment. The cuneiform sign for to eat is a bowl tilted toward a human head. The sign for beer appears on some of the very earliest tablets in human history. The Sumerians understood what mattered, and honestly, I love that about them. When future archaeologists dig us up, they will find servers full of cat photos. When we dug up the Sumerians, we found the oldest writing was about beer. Somehow, across 5,000 years, that feels exactly right. Step out into the city in mid-morning, when the streets are at their most crowded, and you discover that the lanes are so narrow, two laden donkeys cannot pass each other without one backing up. The houses press close on both sides, upper stories leaning out overhead so that the strip of sky above your head is only a handspan wide. The surface underfoot is packed earth, not pleasant after a night of foot traffic and the city's abundant animals. Donkeys used for transport, pigs rooting along the walls, goats appearing around corners with an air of absolute personal authority. The smell is complex and persistent. No ancient city of 50,000 people smelled of anything a modern nose would call pleasant, and is no exception. But the people who live here have never known anything else, and they move through these lanes with the easy rhythm of those for whom this is simply the texture of existence. The craftsmen's quarters you can find by sound long before you see them. Metalworkers hammering copper, imported at serious cost from Anatolia and the Persian Gulf, into tools and the elaborate personal ornaments that Sumerian elites wore. Potters at their wheels, spinning out the standardized beveled rim bowls by the dozen mass-produced vessels of remarkable uniformity. These bowls are found in enormous quantities at every Sumerian site, because they had one purpose: distributing rations to workers, and were then simply discarded. They are the disposable cups of the ancient world, and their very sameness is quiet proof of how organized this society actually was. You cannot mass-produce a standard vessel without a standard measure, and you cannot maintain a standard measure without institutions to enforce it. The Sumerians had both. The weavers work in long textile workshops attached to the temple precinct. Wool from the temple flocks, flax from the outer fields, all of it arrives raw and must be cleaned, combed, spun, and woven into the cloth that both clothes the city and fills the trading boats going downriver to the Persian Gulf. The workshops are staffed largely by women, many in difficult circumstances. Widows, those whose husbands are away on service, those brought back from conflicts between rival city-states. The temple records their rations with the same precision it applies to everything else. A woman weaver in receives a daily allowance of barley, oil, and wool according to her classification in the temple's labor system. She is not free in any modern sense, but she is fed, housed, and recognized within a recorded system of obligation, which is considerably more than the unrecorded world outside the walls can offer. The marketplace sits in the lower city, near the canal quay where the boats arrive. Rests on the Euphrates, and the river is its connection to everything it cannot produce itself. The boats drifting up to the quay are remarkable craft, some stitched together from reeds and sealed with bitumen, others built from imported timber at considerable cost, all moving with or against the current on journeys that might take weeks each way. They carry lapis lazuli from mines in what is now Afghanistan. They carry carnelian from the distant Indus Valley, a journey of extraordinary difficulty by any ancient standard. They carry copper and tin from Anatolia and the Gulf Coast, without which bronze cannot be made. In return, the boats leave carrying the one thing Sumer has in abundance: grain, textiles, and the finished goods produced by its craftsmen. Southern Mesopotamia had almost no metal, almost no stone, almost no timber. The entire civilization was built from mud and reeds, and it traded its agricultural surplus for everything else it needed. And here is a fact that genuinely rearranges the map of human ingenuity for me every time I think about it. The Sumerians invented the 60-second minute and the 60-minute hour. Their counting system was built on a base of 60 rather than the base of 10 we use today, and it gave us these divisions of time we still live inside. They chose 60 because it divides so beautifully into halves, thirds, quarters, fifths, sixths, tenths, twelfths, 15ths, 20ths, 30ths. A measurement system that handles fractions cleanly is extremely useful when you are splitting fields among several heirs or calculating how much barley 60 workers need for a month's rations. The Sumerians were not trying to build mathematical philosophy. They were solving everyday problems. And their solution was so elegant that it echoed forward into every timekeeping system that followed them, all the way to the clock face on the phone sitting in your pocket right now. The afternoon is the quiet part of the day, when the worst of the heat drives most of the city indoors. The potters close their kiln doors. The weavers inside the temple workshops slow their pace. In the narrow lanes, the shade offered by overhanging upper stories becomes genuinely valuable, and the population shifts toward the deeper shade of interior courtyards, where clay jars of water sit in the coolest corners. The canal workers rest through midday and return to their maintenance in late afternoon, when the sun's angle softens and the heat becomes something a body can move through again. This is the rhythm the plain imposes. Early morning work, rest through the hottest hours, renewed activity in the cooler afternoon and evening. It is not laziness, it is thermodynamics. Evening brings the city back to life in a different register. Cooking fires are lit in the courtyard ovens. The smell of barley bread and fish grilling over open coals drifts through the lanes. The Sumerians ate simply by modern standards, barley bread and barley beer as staples, fish from the rivers and canals and the Gulf, dates from the palm groves, onions, garlic, lentils, oil pressed from sesame. Meat was less frequent, though the temple performed regular animal offerings whose portions were distributed in specific amounts to specific ranks of temple staff. A surviving tablet from the Ur-3 period, a later phase of Sumerian civilization around 2100 before our era, records rations of beer, bread, oil and onions allocated to messengers on a specific day in the reign of a specific king. The fact that we can read this now, that we know the rations, the date, the king's name, is remarkable. It is the direct consequence of a decision taken 5,000 years ago to write things down. At night, in the courtyards and on the rooftops, the sky above Ur is extraordinary in ways I do not think a modern city dweller can truly picture. There is no artificial light for hundreds of miles in any direction. The Milky Way stretches from horizon to horizon, so bright in the clear desert air that it casts faint shadows on the flat rooftops. I grew up with street lamps, and even now I cannot properly imagine a sky like that. But the Sumerians lived under it every night. They watched it with careful attention, because the movement of stars and planets governed the religious calendar, which governed the agricultural calendar, which governed when canals were opened and when seeds were planted and when the harvest was expected. Their astronomers, who were also priests, tracked the moon with the same bureaucratic precision they applied to grain records. Their lunar calendar, adjusted later for the solar year, is the quiet ancestor of the Jewish and Islamic calendars still in use today. The Sumerian word for month was the word for moon. The word for writing was the word for a garden's furrow, the stylus pressing into clay, the way a seed drill pressed into earth. They understood, without ever stating it as philosophy, that recording and growing were the same act. That civilization was simply what you left behind in the ground after you had gone. And somewhere in the city tonight, a scribe is pressing a stylus into a fresh clay tablet. He is recording a transaction, the transfer of a field, the settlement of a debt, the receipt of 30 jars of oil. And the marks he is making will outlast his city, outlast his language, outlast his entire civilization. When archaeologists finally excavate Ur in the early 20th century, 4,500 years after this evening, they will find hundreds of thousands of tablets like it. Personal letters, legal contracts, hymns to the goddess Nanna, jokes, lists of words in Sumerian alongside their equivalents in Akkadian, produced by scribes learning a language that was already fading, and the Epic of Gilgamesh, telling of a king of Uruk who searched the ends of the earth for immortality and discovered at last that the only immortality available to any of us was the memory preserved by the written word. The scribe did not know any of this. He pressed his stylus into soft clay and recorded an ordinary transaction on an ordinary evening in one of the very first cities the world had ever seen. The clay dried. The city, over long centuries, surrendered to silt and silence. The tablet survived. We are still reading it. And sometimes I think about him. That anonymous man on a warm Mesopotamian night who accidentally spoke across 5,000 years simply because he needed to remember who had taken what from the granary. If you made it all the way here with me, you are exactly the kind of curious mind this channel was built for. Press that subscribe button so the next lost world finds you automatically. We have so many of them still to walk through together. And I would genuinely love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me, if you could step through the gates of any ancient city for just one single day, which one would you choose? I read every answer. I'm your host at Mystique History, and I will meet you in the next story.